Hello, welcome everybody. I'm Trisha with Virtue Lab. Thank you for joining us for this event. We're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive and a look behind the curtains at taking university research from lab into market. And before we meet our moderator today, I do want to thank our title sponsor, Slalom. And for the session in particular that we're on, our sponsors, National Energy Technology Laboratory and OSU Advantage Accelerator. So I'm going to introduce you to Katie Pettinger. Katie is a wonderful businesswoman. She is a climate tech or clean tech catalyst, and she does all of this on top of being a mother and a wife. I met Katie probably about 5 years ago, where she actually came from technology transfer at NETL, joined our team for a bit. She has since moved on and has co-founded and is the managing director for Gadgesol Labs. And then she also works with faculty and researchers at OSU's Advantage Accelerator. So it's been awesome to work with her over the years. And let's go ahead and bring Katie, if you want to give a wave. And she's going to lead us into this conversation with everybody, as you could probably get that she's the ideal moderator for this. So Katie, if you want to tell us more about what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, thank you so much, Trisha. Hello, everyone. So as you could tell from the title, we're going to be talking about taking technologies to commercialization, specifically with a focus on university or and/or national lab technologies. And this is a very exciting, but very hard, challenging process to do, as I know firsthand, and Jen and Beth have experienced firsthand and are experiencing firsthand as well. The good news is there's a lot of resources along the way to help you do this at the university level, at the state levels, at the federal levels, and at private funding levels. And so we're going to be talking through exactly how to navigate through all of that, that journey and what that looks like. Taking any sort of technology or innovation to market is something where it sounds really cool and amazing, but there are so many different technical de-risking milestones and commercialization and market de-risking milestones to achieve along the way. And so it really truly is a journey. So we're going to go ahead and kick this off. Special thanks to Beth Espinette and Jen Amador for joining us today as panelists. I'm going to just kind of give a little bit of context about where Jen and Beth come from, and then I have a handful of questions for them so they can share, giving them the opportunity to share specifically about their individual journeys taking a technology from the university and an idea to market and where they're at. So first, Jen Amador. Am I saying your last name correctly, Jen? Amador or Amador?
I don't really pay any attention. Both are fine.
Which one do you prefer?
I don't actually have a preference. I don't think that most English speakers can really pronounce it correctly. My dad does, but that's about the extent of it. So they're both fine. It's great. Don't worry.
The thing is, everyone's going to butcher it anyways. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, unless you're a native Spanish speaker from like Nicaragua, I guess, but I don't pay too much attention to that. I butcher it, so it's okay.
Sounds good. No one can tell me how to say my last name either, if it helps at all. There's debate within the family about how exactly to pronounce it. But anyways, so Jen is the co-founder and COO of NextTC Materials. NextTC is a spin-out of Oregon State University. They're an early stage startup focused on delivering novel, transparent, conductive materials to multiple end-use applications, including solar panels and smart building envelopes. In addition to her work at NextTC, she also works as a program facilitator for ECOS BC, delivering education and innovation and providing STEM students with the skills needed to translate basic research into solutions to real-world problems. She has a BS in chemistry from the University of Utah and completed her PhD in materials chemistry at OSU in 2017. So again, thanks so much for being a part of this, Jen. And I will do a little caveat here. I am 34 weeks pregnant and at the stage where it's a little hard to breathe sometimes. So if I sound a little awkward, it's because the baby is like kicking me in the rib cage here. So bear with me. Beth Espinette, am I saying your last name correctly?
Okay. Yeah, nice job.
So Beth, actually we met where we were part of the same National Science Foundation Phase 2 cohort a few years ago. And so Beth is a designer and scientist. She founded fashion tech startup Unspun in order to solve big sticky problems in the fashion industry. Unspun is building an inclusive and sustainable industry through custom fit on-demand manufacturing, like body scan jeans made with 3D weaving robotics. Yes, please, because I don't know about you, but I can never find any jeans that fit correctly ever. Just don't wear them. It has been recognized as the best invention by Time Magazine, best of what's new by Popular Science, world-changing idea by Fast Company, Marie Claire's Best Sustainable Jeans Brand Award, and the Global Change Award winner by H&M. So before Unspun, Beth actually developed products and materials in the outdoor gear and apparel industry, instructed at a machine shop. She helped design robot human soft good interfaces and taught product design as an assistant professor at the University of Oregon. So she has a pretty cool Oregon connection. And throughout her career, she's been fascinated by nature's obvious yet overlooked knack for circular manufacturing. She serves as an SBIR proposal reviewer for the U.S. National Science Foundation and received a BS in fiber science and apparel design from Cornell and an MFA in design from Stanford. So thanks so much, Beth. It's great to have you here. So let's go ahead and get started with some of the questions. And Beth, I think I'll start off with you. So can you kind of just talk us through, how did your journey with Unspun start? Where did it start? Like, what were the specifics around that? And how did you come to become a co-founder?
Yeah, thanks, Katie, and congrats on your baby. I'm actually a couple weeks ahead of you, which means my baby has dropped. I'm
No
at
way.
36 weeks. Yeah. And so I have a little bit of breathing room, but
That's hilarious. I think last time we met, I had my baby with me
Yes.
at the NSF conference in DC, and you, yeah, I think they're at
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, it's an added challenge, but also a motivation.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So getting to your question, it's been like, you have seeds that are planted. Everyone asks, like, what was that one impetus, that one thing that started the company? And for me, it was just years of kind of frustration with the industry. Though I think the breaking straw was being in a meeting where this was at one of the outdoor apparel companies I was at, and we were discussing what we should do with all these excess tents that we had made. And there were really smart people sitting around the room with me. And I just felt like we were wasting our time having to think about, like, we made all this extra crap and now we have to take these people's precious time to think about what the least evil option is to get rid of these tents. Do we ship them off to a third world country? Do we incinerate them and burn them? Or do we send them straight to landfill? I was like, what's the best option? And I think that was like, why is this a problem? Like, we carry computers around in our pockets these days. Like, technology can do amazing things. Why are we still dealing with this, like, excess inventory problem? Why do we make stuff before people want it? So I think that kind of planted the seed and had me thinking, let's build on demand. Like, let's build technology that will make it possible for us to start with the consumer and then make a product. Because right now the clothing industry starts with products, makes hundreds of thousands of them, and then pushes them out to people. That was just really frustrating for me. So that kind of started, as you can kind of hear, it started when I was in industry, and I wanted to learn from other fields, because I had learned all about sewing machines and how manufacturing works in clothing, but I felt like we were stuck with the way, like, cut and sew was. And I wanted to take inspiration from other fields. So that's when I started working in the machine shop and trying to learn about other types of manufacturing. And that's what led me to grad school for just a couple of years, to a very exploratory grad program. But through that, I was able to experiment. And I think that's the cool thing about academia. Today we're talking about academia meets commercialization. And what's amazing about being in school is you have that time and space to really ask those bigger questions and to explore and to make mistakes that you might not be allowed to, or might not feel like you're allowed to in business or in commercialization. So I really took advantage of that. Mine admittedly was a little bit more on, like, the art and conceptual side of this sort of problem, but it still brought in a lot of engineering and a lot of chemistry and science that helped, you know, it's kind of a mix of the two to think about manufacturing, especially additive manufacturing for clothing. And so through academia, through just like a couple of years of that, and then transitioning to the University of Oregon, I was able to just test things out, to be silly with some of the projects, to cross things out along the way, because that's part of it. And then to realize, you know, what that direction should be. So for me, it was a lot of 3D printing and a lot of like mixing weird materials together, only to realize like yarn should really be our fundamental, like our elemental kind of material that we work with. Is there a way we can look at building from yarn differently, not building from fabric? And so that sort of led to what Unspun has been going after with its technology, and eventually convinced, or was able to help me convince my co-founders to join me. But that's sort of the start of it. I could go on for a long time, but I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So how many co-founders did you have?
There are 3 of us. So we were really explicit, really intentional about, I was coming from design. Walden, my co-founder I met first, is coming from business. And then third co-founder, Kevin, was coming from engineering. We felt like having those very different backgrounds, but still seeing the same vision was really important to us. So that, and I think 4 years later, it pays off. Like we are always betting heads, but in the right kinds of ways. We're always bringing new things to the table, and we don't feel like we're kind of jockeying for the same things because we all have our own expertise.
Yeah, like definitely makes sense. And congratulations on your recent $7.5 million fundraising round. Very exciting. So 4 years has definitely paid off. Okay, Jen, so moving on to talking about NextTC. So same question, you know, can you talk about how your journey as co-founder there started? How did NextTC emerge, come to be, all of that good stuff?
Yeah, sure. So you already mentioned I majored in chemistry at the University of Utah, graduated in 2011. And when I was there, I think Beth already hit on this, but the nice part about being a student and being in academia is that you can kind of ask big questions and really think about what interests you. And no one's going to tell you, no, you can't do that, because you have all the time in the world. You're going to school and that's your main focus. So when I was there, I started finding out about sustainability as a problem. And I started thinking about, you know, how can science solve some of the big problems that exist in the world today? And the big one that I ended up working on as an undergrad in the lab there was on energy conversion and on renewable energy sources. So at that point, we were looking at hydrothermal, and I looked at what we were doing and went, this is really probably never going to work the way that we want it to, but I really like this problem. I really like working on renewable energy. Oh, I should probably go to grad school. I want to keep learning about this. So I applied to Oregon State and started working with Doug Kessler. And when I was there, he was running a CCI, a Center for Chemical Innovation, called the Center for Sustainable Materials Chemistry, so the CSMC. And the CCIs were really great because they were about taking academic research and broadening the focus, because, you know, basic research is really cool and you do get to think about a lot of interesting things and solve some big problems. But at the same time, it's like, what value does this have? And are we actually doing anything to make the world better? So part of the focus there was that we had to learn about innovation and how to translate innovation to, like, how to translate research into innovation. So I had to take a workshop. At the time, I was very upset about this, that I had to take this workshop that would take me out of the lab for like 4 days to learn about, you know, what is innovation and what's a value proposition? What are value chains? How do you fit in? Does any of your research like translate into something that could be something bigger? So the first day, I remember them saying to us that if we played our cards right, someday we could rent lab space in the then brand new lab building at the U of O, and how one day we could be a company that would move in there, and then in 6 months they'd be opening all those labs and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I don't think I could ever do that. And then by the end of it, I was like, okay, I don't think I can do this, but I want to do this. So I need to figure out a way to make it happen. And I kept up with it with the innovation education. I got involved in EcosVC because I really cared about what they did and I wanted to keep learning, basically. And In 2017, Doug came to me, my PI, and said that one of the postdocs in his lab had hit upon something that nobody thought was possible that could be done. Basically a new way of making materials that are needed for solar panels and smart buildings, and one that was much more cost effective and lower energy costs to produce. So kind of a win on two fronts. And he came to both of us and essentially said, hey, if you guys are willing to do this, I think you could really start a company and have something good come from this. And so I said, okay, because I was about to graduate and didn't have a job lined up yet. And it was what I wanted to do. And the postdoc, Corey Perkins, fortunately was like, all right, well, this is my research and I want to see it through. So between the two of us, we kind of went ahead and held hands and jumped off the cliff together.
Awesome. And Jen, if you can just narrow in on a little bit more on the problem that you're solving. So it sounds like it's a cheaper material for solar panels and smart buildings, but can you talk a little bit more about the problem?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have a question too about what problem you're trying to solve, but I'll just go ahead and hone in a little bit. So in solar panels and in smart buildings, both of them, I mean, this is a really wide field, but they both require transparent conductive oxides. So basically, you need some kind of substrate. So what you're actually building your smart window on or building your solar panel on that is transparent, highly transparent. If it's a window, you want to be able to see through it. And if it's a solar panel, you have to be able to get sunlight through it. Otherwise, it won't work. And there are some big problems with the ones that are currently manufactured. So the technology that is in place right now is on the older side. It's very energy intensive to produce, and it results in these substrates that are really, really rough. And surface roughness in my field leads to defects, leads to things don't perform the way that you want them to do. You end up with shorts. In the case of the windows in particular, you get what's called a starry night kind of effect, where instead of the window being nice and clear and you can see through it and the color is uniform. So smart windows work by selectively darkening when you apply a voltage to them to keep UV and heat basically out of a building. Imagine if that doesn't uniformly darken. So instead of being this nice like uniform blue, you have blue, but then there's lots of little clear spots that just don't turn colors. That's the starry night effect. And you don't want that. It means the windows don't work. And so you're not seeing the energy savings that you would see because you're not actually blocking UV or heat. It's not great. And in solar panels, it's the same story. If you end up with shorts, obviously you're reducing the efficiency of the panel. There's also the problem that this coated glass, like these substrates, are really, really expensive too. So you're paying a lot of money for something that may or may not work. And you know, obviously in solar in particular, driving that cost down and making it competitive with other non-renewable sources, the cost per watt is really the key thing. So we looked at this and went, okay, we can address two really big problems here. One thing, our product is a lot cheaper to produce. And two, we believe that we give a superior product to what's out there on the market right now. So we don't have those surface roughness issues. What we make is actually atomically smooth. And what that translates to is better solar panel performance and better smart window performance. It also saves them some steps. There are some steps that they can take to try and smooth out those surfaces before they deposit on them, but adding steps, adding time adds cost, and that's not really ideal for anybody.
Yeah, great. Thanks for explaining all of that. Super fascinating, super exciting at the same time. I for one can't wait to maybe eventually have a smart window and not have to deal with blinds and curtains. Yeah, it'd be so nice. So jumping to the next question, Beth, I'm going to go back to you. So can you talk about, you know, it's one thing to form a company, like finding a co-founder and like, you know, submitting paperwork for company formation, but nothing really starts moving until you get that first round of funding. So can you talk through that process? Like, where did it come from? How did you kind of get your first money in the door?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's going to be a little bit different for every company, and there's really no right or wrong answer. I think for starting out, unless you have like, you know, you're already a famous name or you already have a lot of money, or, you know, for whatever reason, you're super lucky to just have access to big venture capital, it's going to be a number of like smaller jumps and like smaller pieces that you put together along the way. And that's definitely what we did with Unspun. So we kind of did a few things at a time. We applied to NSF funding to start. And that, I mean, that was pivotal for us. The fact that we got it like really changed so many other things, because not only do you get a little bit of resources to work with, but you also have that name to work with. You can go to other investors and angels specifically and other people and say, yeah, we're vetted by the National Science Foundation. That's a huge thing. And so I think with a lot of funding and just getting resources and interest in general, it's about stringing those names together and showing that like these people have done due diligence on us. They've looked into us, and we are really working on and making some progress with what we say we are doing, because it's easy to talk and it's hard to prove yourself if you don't really have that. So for us, it was really, bootstrapping for, I don't know, 6 months or so, but that was kind of around the same time that we had our own jobs, so that you can't really get that much done. And I think when I signed with U of O, actually, as a professor, they were like, yeah, you should work on your company. That's how you can get tenure. And I was like, that sounds amazing. I'm going to do that. It's hard. It's really hard to do that. I'm sure people can pull it off. I know it's very possible, but for what I was trying to take on with Unspun, it just wasn't possible for me. So I needed to leave and focus on the company. And we fortunately got NSF funding like right around the time that I was leaving anyway. I would say that's pretty important. Also look out for incubators. There's so many incubators these days. It's actually a little overwhelming, to be honest. We're at the point now in our company that we're like well known enough that incubators are coming to us, and it's like, well, you know us, so probably we don't need you at this point. Like,
where were you?
Better. Yeah, exactly. But there are a ton out there, so just ask around, do some research. There are local ones, there are global ones. The one that we chose at the beginning that really made a big difference for us was through SOSV. And that's a venture capital group that has incubators around the world. And we chose their HAX accelerator. And HAX is all about hardware, and they're based out of Shenzhen, China. So it actually took us, we were both very US based with our NSF funding, but at a very, we had to separate it by a few days just to make sure there's no funding going to China, but we have NSF funding, that money is going there. And then we're going to work on our robotics and our machine in Shenzhen, China. And I think it would have been really hard for us to have built the robotics that we've built so far in the US. It's just the nature of the beast right now, that in China, you have these big component markets and things that you can just go to, pick up everything you need and kind of put the machine together. So we strung those together, and eventually, I think within a few months, on the side of doing things to commercialize as soon as possible, which was a completely separate thing from the hardware, which I'd be happy to talk about if anyone's interested in that. We did those at the same time, and we're able to think, what's next for bigger funding. And with the traction from both the tech traction of the machine, and proving, look at this machine really works, it really outputs the product we want, plus some sales on the gene side of things, which entailed just software development, which is a lot faster to market. And honestly, if we only stuck with our hardware and we only did what we applied to do through NSF, we would not be a company anymore. It really, we had to break things down into smaller pieces and acknowledge the fact that we're a company. We have to sell things as a business. We need to make money, and we can't just be stuck in research land all the time. We wouldn't be around anymore. So we built software early on that would start that process of end to end from a body scan to the final product. We decided just to commercialize as much as we could on the software to start, and we're slowly just putting the pieces together. And finally this year, we're connecting from end to end 4 years later. But we were able to get that funding, that kind of secondary funding from venture capital and the secondary funding from the NSF, because we commercialized earlier on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's a really good point. National Science Foundation SBIR money is fantastic, but you have to paint a big dream and a big picture and show that you're going to make a lot of impact. And the steps to get there are often not quite as near term as NSF would like, I think, sometimes. So the money is fantastic. It's definitely a catalyst for jumping things forward, but I can definitely relate. So Jen, same question towards you. Can you talk about, where did that first round of funding come from? I think you guys also received NSF SBIR funding, right?
We did, yeah. And I'll talk about that a little bit because I think our funding situation is a little weird, but hearing about other people, it's like, I didn't know you could do this, but you can, so might as well bring it up. But yeah, no, our first round of funding actually came from OSU. We got some kind of keep us alive long enough to figure out whether or not we can do this funding through the University Venture Development Fund, so the UVDF, which Katie is very familiar with. Thanks to that, it was $60,000. It was basically enough to pay ourselves long enough to be like, do we actually have an idea here that anybody will want to buy? Does this actually work? And we were able to go ahead and transition that into applying for SBIRs. So we were in a very fortunate position where we had a little bit of funding in hand to fund us both as postdocs at OSU, which is not glamorous, but pays the bills, and figure out, is this something real? And if it is, how do we make it real? So for us, we translated the UVDF funding into applying for multiple SBIRs, NSF and DOE. And the first NSF one that we applied for, I remember the reviewer leaving us a comment. 3 out of the 4 reviewers were very positive about it and said, yes, they recommended us for funding. And then the last reviewer absolutely tanked us and said that there was no way that what we were proposing was actually real or could ever be real, and that our technology would never work. And I was just like, well, I have lab results that says that it is, but okay, sure. So that was fun, but DOE, so NSF and DOE kind of differ in how they deal with SBIRs. So DOE has a specific call for proposals where you have to fit into one of their topics, whereas NSF is just like, is it science? Does it fit under us? Great, go ahead and apply for us. We'll be happy to review it and probably tell you, you probably no, but if it's a really good idea and you have some basis in science, we might tell you yes. So the DOE one that we got was not actually for what we wanted to commercialize originally. It was for a different barrier layer involved in solar panels, utilizing similar technology, but not the same. So we said, okay, great. This is at least something to get us on the road. Let's go ahead and apply for it. It's a long shot, and then they funded us. So it was like, oh, all right, here we are. So having to pivot and figure out what you're doing and what you want to do and how it all fits together is very, very familiar to me, though fortunately I have not had to write any software yet. But yeah, from DOE, with the DOE money, we got that, and our project period was supposed to run through mid-2020. Obviously, that didn't quite pan out the way we were hoping for. So what ended up happening, we got a year-long kind of extension to apply for phase 2, because normally you have a limited window to apply in. Our program officer was very understanding for everybody that got kind of interrupted by COVID and said, take the time, apply not in May of 2020, apply in May of 2021. And we went ahead and said, okay, well, we're not working on the DOE proposal. Let's work on a different proposal for NSF. So at that point, we were looking at smart windows. I think, Katie, you know about this because we applied for aid funding through the university. It was kind of a stopgap. We need to pay for some testing. How are we going to actually do that to prove proof of concept? We did that. We did customer interviews through the accelerator. So OSU Accelerator gets a plug again. And with the information that we got there, we went ahead and we applied to NSF, and this time we actually got a phase 1 proposal funded. The timing on this meant that we were writing 2 phase 2 proposals at the same time for different SBIR programs for different topics and everything. But our DOE phase 2 SBIR was approved in July. And at the time, we were told that by NSF that they also wanted to fund us. So we had to pick if we were going to be funded by DOE or NSF. And DOE was nicer to us and gave us more money, so we decided to go with DOE. So that, yeah, they approved our budget literally last week. Our project period is supposed to start this week, but they haven't released the funds yet. So we're trying to get them on the phone to find out, hey, what's going on? Because we kind of need this
Their
money to be able to, yeah. It's like
Yeah.
the project period starts and we have a lot of things we'd like to do, including some equipment we need to buy to be able to do this. And we kind of can't do it unless you give us the money. So you approved it. Where is it?
Yeah. Yeah, working with federal agencies can be sometimes fun.
Sometimes, yeah.
Okay, so moving on to the next question here. We have a little bit of time left. And Beth, this will go back to you, but you know, what motivates you? Obviously it's hard. Like starting any startup is hard. Pivoting is hard. You're basically figuring out this roadway, this pathway where no one's ever gone down before for your specific technology. And just there's so many questions and trying to navigate all of that while you're making some decisions and hoping that they're the right ones. So, and you know, in the face of all that, what motivates you? What inspires you to just kind of keep moving forward and keep trying to make something happen?
Yeah, I think that it comes back to the original curiosity that kind of motivates people to start companies in the first place. Like if it's really genuine, and it's not like I wanted to start a company, which is I love Stanford, but like I'll throw a little shade at Stanford. I remember meeting so many students there who they would say, "Oh yeah, I want to start a company someday." And you're like, "Oh cool. Like what do you want to do?" And they're like, "We'll figure it out later." And it's like, I mean, maybe that works. I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who have started super successful companies that way, but that just doesn't work for me. Like I have to go in really, really believing in what I'm working on, and otherwise it's never going to be worth it. Like it is such a struggle every single day. So I think that's, the step one is like really believing what you're doing. And I think having that curiosity to answer those original questions, and those original questions turn into so many more questions along the way that it almost reinforces like working on it. And then there are way more things that continue to reinforce it, like the team that you work with, like those people, they end up being super motivating, like to look around and say, wow, like these amazing people are working on this problem that I was thinking about. Like how did I get so lucky? I think that's another motivation. And then it extends to your customers too. Like I didn't expect, when I was telling you about, starting a company to build on demand, it was really about like, 3D printers and how can we like almost grow clothing? How can we make it on the spot additively? And it was very like science based. And then once we started getting out to customers, that became another motivation, like hearing people's stories about, like from people you would expect to not be able to find their size in the store, all the way to like someone you look at and you think they're quote unquote normal, like everyone thinks there's something wrong with them, and it's just not the case. It's just the system that's set up. It's just doesn't really make sense. So I think that becomes an additional motivation. So they're just constantly things that kind of become your cheerleader along the way. But I think it really comes down to that original curiosity and like wanting to just find out what's the answer to that original thing that got me here.
Yep, for sure. Jen, same question to you. What kind of keeps you moving forward?
I mean, at this point, we're very early stage. So really it's us, and then we have a single employee. And there is something very terrifying, but very motivating about knowing that everything that you do in the lab needs to move things forward, and that if this succeeds or if it fails, it is entirely on you and your co-founder. So right now, being a team of basically two founders and then one employee is like, anything that I do, my own success, my own failure is completely mine. Like, and for me, I need to have that connection and feel like I own what I'm doing. So it's like, yeah, absolutely. This is all on me. At the end of the day, I want this to succeed, so I have to keep going. There's also the piece where what we're doing, if we succeed, is going to really change what utility scale solar looks like, what smart building envelopes look like. So we look at this and we go, we can concretely point to this and say, we can make the world a better place if we actually get our technology to a point where it's getting adopted. And I think everybody wants to think that they're helping. And for me, it's like, yeah, absolutely. Do I want to do things like help the US transition to a completely renewable power source for the grid? Yeah, completely. Do I want to do things like take a look at the heat loss through windows, which is about 40%, by the way, it's terrifying, and say, hey, I can address that. I can change that. Why don't we lop that in half? Like even going from 40 to 20 would be huge, right? Any savings at all without replacing your windows with a wall would be a big deal. So, you know, looking at this and saying like, if this works out, if this pans out, if I keep moving and keep working on this and keep kind of like beating my head against this wall, chipping away at it, eventually it will work and I'll have made a difference and I'll have done something, you know. I'm not like a great artist, I'm not a great writer, or I don't do music or anything, but it's like, can I do something that I think people will appreciate and that people might find beautiful? Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of keeps me moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the really exciting thing is I just applaud both of you for what you're doing, because it's one thing to say like, I want to change the world, but it's another thing to make those sacrifices and actually move forward and to paraphrase what you're saying, Jen, you know, chip away at specific technologies that can make a really huge difference in the lives of consumers in nations. So totally get that. Okay, last question for both of you, and I'll go back to you, Beth. So what's your next goal? You know, again, congratulations on your funding round. So what are you planning to do in the next month, a year or so?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think that the one that I'm most excited about is tying together that software and the hardware and fully commercializing on it. So right now we've done that in the background, but we've never actually had any customers receive their 3D woven products from basically our 3D printer kind of machine for clothing. They've always received it from the typical cut and sew process. So up to today, basically, if someone wants to get a pair of jeans, they get a body scan, they design their jeans, and then all of that comes to us. That runs through our software, which incorporates, you know, a bit of computational geometry, a bit of like rules-based system, and a bit of machine learning, kind of all mixed together to output a pattern that we then send to traditional manufacturing. So it's just traditionally cut and sewn. There are a lot of limitations around that. It's just a very slow process. You lay out one piece of fabric, cut it up, stitch it together. And by the end of this year, we're going to be, instead of sending that pattern to, you know, to someone who's going to cut it out of fabric, it's going to go as instructions for our 3D weaving machine, which will then weave the product for the customer. So 4 years in, that was their original SBIR kind of grant, was to prove out this technology. We never said, oh, we're going to bring it to market in 6 months. Of course, like that was not part of it. That would have been a lie. But to be finally connecting that and to bring that to customers is the thing that I'm most excited about, and that's one of our biggest goals coming up.
Yeah, awesome. I'll be excited if I can maybe one day order maternity clothes via that process, because I cannot find anything that fits at this stage. I'm sure you can relate. So Jen, same question, you know, what are the next steps for you with NextDC?
Yeah, well, with the recent award of phase 2, next steps for us mostly look like focusing on scale up and on trying to develop our MVP a little further. We're lucky enough to have some early customer engagement. So we have people that are very eagerly awaiting the first results that we get off of our new coder whenever we get the money and it arrives. So that's kind of what's keeping me up at night right now. I mean, long term, obviously, we'll be looking at other funding sources, so going after angel funding and then possibly VC, but for now it's really just keep moving ahead, keep scaling up, work on the milestones for phase 2, because again, we literally just got awarded that grant.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate both of your time. I know you both are very busy, so thanks so much for participating in our panel today. At this point, I know there was a lot of questions in the Q&A. I kept kind of seeing a bunch pop up, and I think you all answered those via chat. So thank you for that. We're going to go ahead and transition to the next phase of this panel, where we're going to talk more on the resources side. After hearing from Beth and Jen about their journeys, we'll get to hear a little bit more about the SBIR funding that we keep talking about, and some other sources of funding to help other folks like Jen and Beth be able to do similar things with different technologies that also have the potential for a huge impact. So first, I just kind of wanted to emphasize, when we talk about moving a technology from a university or a lab into the marketplace, there are, and you hopefully you kind of picked up on this from what Jen and Beth were talking about, there's quite a bit of technical de-risking and commercialization de-risking that needs to happen. So you sort of often start with this technology idea or this prototype that you developed in your lab, or maybe it's just a proof of concept and not even necessarily a prototype. And of course, there's a massive amount of technical development that needs to happen from that little lab scale process or system or product that you have to manufacturing at scale, whatever that looks like. And there's the question of economics. Just because you can do it from a technical perspective, is it going to be cheap enough for it to be widely adopted? And concurrently, at the same time, there's so many different business models and different value chains from a commercialization perspective, and different companies and in market understanding that you need to really wrap your head around as well. And so one of the challenges of trying to move a technology out the door is to be able to tackle both of those technical de-risking or de-risking paths from the technical and the commercialization perspective head on. And really you wanted to concurrently kind of navigate your way through those. So the really fantastic thing about SBIR funding is that often it gives you the funding you need at the very beginning when things are risky from both a technical perspective and a commercialization perspective, to sort of understand how that plays together and give you that funding runway. So what we're going to do now is hear from Lenny Wolfe and James Ferguson, and they're going to talk about some of the resources that are available for different innovators and technologists and potential entrepreneurs to get started along similar paths that Beth and Jen have done. And so first, what I'm going to do is just introduce Lenny Wolfe to you. And Lenny has a couple slides he's going to walk us through. And then we'll move on to hearing from James. James works for the Department of Energy National Energy Technology Lab. And I'll have a few questions for James as well. So Lenny, if you want to go ahead and get your slides up. Lenny Wolfe is actually the SBIR STTR Assistance Manager at Virtue Lab, and he's helped start up, supply, and receive federal SBIR awards since 2013. He was actually incredibly instrumental in helping Gadgetstar Laboratories, the company that I run, receive our first and second SBIR awards. So I can speak firsthand to Leon's value. Leon has a chemical engineering background. He spent 25 years in product development before joining Virtue Lab. So Leon, can you talk to us a little bit more about these SBIR grants that we keep hearing about?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Katie, and thanks for the kind words. Is everyone hearing me okay? Hello?
Yes. Yep.
Good, okay. So as Katie mentioned, my name's Lenny Wolfe. I do work for Virtue Lab, the host for today's organization, and I'm going to talk about SBIR, which you've been hearing about both from Jen and Beth, who've had a really great experiences, it sounds like, as well as if you were at the 10 a.m. morning session, the intro session for today's fuel event. You heard a lot about a huge range of federal funding, which is destined to increase under the Biden administration, which was great news. So you've heard about SBIR. It stands for the Small Business Innovation Research Grant, and every letter is actually really important. It's dedicated funding for small businesses to get a technology that's innovative, based in good research, but take it one step further and get it to market. It has to have commercial potential. The STTR program is a smaller companion program, and together both of them are now over $4 billion a year of federal funding. And the government's been doing this for about almost 40 years now in order to seed innovation that is too risky or too advanced for the private sector so that the US can remain competitive on a global basis. We want to compete in a global economy and the global technology race. And of course, it's being done for American benefit as well. It's going to grow, it's intended to grow high value jobs and high revenue industries that stay in the country. So I've been saying this as if it's one program, but it's actually more like 12 independent programs at the federal agencies, including the ones Jen and Beth have mentioned. Department of Energy and National Science Foundation are probably the most relevant at a climate impact conference like today. Department of Defense, National Institute of Health are the two largest. And together those top 5 agencies comprise almost $3.5 billion of the $4 billion. The rest is distributed amongst smaller agencies like USDA, NOAA, EPA, and NIST. Only the top 5 agencies have STTRs because it's a smaller program and it would be it would really be too small at the smaller agencies. But the key thing to know about STTR, especially in context of today's university research focus, is that an STTR has to be done with a university in combination with a small business. The small business is still the recipient of the grant, but the university gets a dedicated slice in order to perform research by faculty as well as use university facilities. An SBIR grant, again, the larger program at all 12 agencies, can have a university partner, but it does not have to. So I know this slide's a little complicated, and we do have this on our website, this breakout by agencies. So please check out the Virtue Lab website whenever you want to learn more about SBIR. You can also go to the federal SBA website, which is www.sbir.gov, and they have a ton of information, including some really good tutorials that go into things we do not have time for today. So I just have a couple more things to wrap up. The first is, why should you do this? And then if you're interested, what are your next steps? So the speakers previously really did a good job of laying out, you really need money to get university research as well as any kind of conceptual innovation from that sort of basic ideation phase into more of a prototyping and demonstration of feasibility phase. SBIR and STTR funding is often the only option besides your personal funds or friends and family that are willing to take a risk at this stage, and it's non-dilutive, which means that there's no equity taken or a management stake. The government just wants you to succeed. They're not trying to get a controlling interest in the company. And as said earlier, they're trying to fund higher risk innovation than a typical private investor would fund. And a key thing that's often overlooked is that this is a set aside. Government grants are really competitive. You're competing against other NGOs, universities, nonprofits very often, consortiums, trade associations. SBIR is completely carved out for only small businesses as defined by the SBA. And that is a huge advantage. I've worked on some other grants for larger consortiums, and the big players in the industry have a definite advantage. There's a lot more funding for first-time startups within SBIR. And you get, as Jen, I think, mentioned in the chat, you get to keep the IP and the data rights. The government, again, does not really want to have any kind of royalty or controlling interest. All right, so we've made this sound like it's really awesome, and it is, but it can be really complicated, and Virtue Lab has funding from the federal government to help. I've been doing this now for almost 10 years and built up a reasonable body of knowledge and tools to help assist you. We provide all ranges of consulting, both from myself, connections to other resources, and some dedicated grant writing contractors that can help in the process, anything ranging from commercialization planning, technical reviews and critiques, or even assistance with some of the bureaucracy and registrations. And as this slide says, it's offered free to all companies in all industries, not just clean tech in Oregon. And please go to this URL on the slide and watch the videos and then apply if you're in the state of Oregon. And then we have a brand new program that has not really even started yet until October, where we're going to be able to help companies in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Alaska for all types of federal funding in clean energy including SBIR in these other states, as well as including some of the DOE funding opportunities and the ARPA-E funding opportunities that, that were shown at this morning's presentation. So if anybody wants, we don't have an application for that yet, but again, please contact me. I'll put my email in the chat, and you can also go to the URL shown here. And thanks, and I'll be happy to answer questions. And I'm going to turn it over to James.
Thanks, Leon. Actually, if you can stop sharing. Yeah, I'm going to transition over to James' slides. So James, thanks so much for joining us today. Just a little bit of background on James. He's currently the manager of state and local partnerships within the National Energy Technology Laboratory, which is one of the DOE national labs. They have a site in Pittsburgh, West Virginia, and here in our very own Albany, Oregon. James initiates and develops collaborations with external organizations, including industry, academic institutions, state and local governments, NGOs, economic development organizations as well. Him and his team are responsible for business development, technology innovation, and technology commercialization. He has an MBA in operations research and management science and a bachelor's in mechanical engineering technology. He also served in the United States Army and the Pennsylvania Army National Guard. So again, James, thanks so much for being with us today. I know you pulled together a couple slides to just kind of talk through options for collaborating with NETL and what that could look like. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. I'm going to make this bigger. Oops. Okay, can everybody see that okay?
Looks good, Katie. Thank you.
No problem.
And thanks for the introduction. Again, my name's James Ferguson with the National Energy Technology Laboratory. I'm in Pittsburgh. I also wanted to give a shout out to my colleague, Dave Allman, who's an Associate Director of Materials Engineering and Manufacturing located in Albany, Oregon, who should be on the line. And between the two of us, we should be able to provide assistance to folks who are interested in working with NETL. And I wanted to talk about some of the options for collaborating with NETL as a DOE national lab. And one of the first big ones is applying for competitive funding opportunity announcements. And one of the things with NETL, like other organizations, is that there's a number of technologies that we offer through funding opportunity announcements. And Katie, one of the takeaways I want folks to get from today's session is that, you know, I would like to act as your concierge into NETL. You know, as a DOE national lab, there is a bureaucracy, and it's not always easy for folks to understand where to go and what to do and how to take the appropriate actions. So I'm going to offer myself up. If you're looking for information on funding, you see the next highlighted item is Small Business Innovation Research, SBIR and STTR that Leon just mentioned. We have university training and research programs. We work with University Turbine Systems Research program is one of the highlighted university programs. We work with HBCUs and other minority institutions. You can license NETL technologies and innovations. I didn't highlight that one, but that's one that a lot of organizations take advantage of. We have a regional workforce initiative where we try to help work with state, local, regional organizations to help provide the workforce of the future in advanced energy technologies. The Technology Commercialization Fund is a highlight where organizations can help commercialize a technology developed at the National Energy Technology Laboratory in collaboration with some of our award-winning researchers. And then finally, on the highlighted items, we have graduate education programs and internship opportunities for both ORISE fellows from professors, postdocs, and both graduate and undergraduate students. And then students can also apply for Mickey Leland Energy Fellowship or the Consortium for Hybrid Resilient Energy Systems, and that's primarily for Hispanic students. So again, there's a variety of ways to partner and collaborate with NETL. Again, not always easy to understand how to do it, but I am excited and look forward to working with interested parties from this session who like to consider how to work with NETL.
Great, thanks, James. And here's your email address, I believe. So can you just talk through, you know, if you're a technologist, if you or have a startup company that you think would be a good match for NETL, where would you recommend to start? Just by sending you an email and kind of having a discussion?
That's right. And what typically happens is, you know, in pre-COVID times, we would have staff out at different conferences and events, and we would meet with individuals and organizations in person. We'd have a conversation and understand what their technical and research priorities were, and we try to connect them to the appropriate points of contact within NETL. Now during COVID, most of the contact is made virtually by email or phone, and what I like to recommend everyone do is consider sending me an email, or you can give me a phone call. My cell phone number, by the way, Katie, is 412-638-3178. I'll put that in the chat as well. But email me, call me, and we can connect you to your appropriate points of contact. The NETL researchers, the NETL leads for SBIR, the NETL leads for the graduate education programs, to make sure we connect you to the appropriate person. And again, I'll be your concierge to make sure that we follow through, make that connection happen, and get the appropriate information to you. I have so much more information, Katie, that I could have put in that presentation, that I cut it back to just 2 slides, but I have a lot of details on some of the NETL technologies that we have R&D programs on, including advanced materials and advanced alloys that my colleague Dave Allman is one of the leading experts on in this country. But, you know, carbon capture and direct air capture and rare earth elements and critical materials and artificial intelligence and machine learning, you know, hydrogen technologies, you know, sensors and controls, fuel cells. There's all kinds of technologies that NETL is working on in support of the DOE Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, as well as the DOE Offices of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, the Office of Electricity, and we support other agencies as well. So I'm excited and looking forward to getting emails and or phone calls from folks to understand what your technical priorities and interests are, how we can connect you to your appropriate points of contact within NETL, and get your technologies and your ideas moving toward commercialization and into the marketplace. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, James. And just one follow-up question / point of clarification. So, you know, NETL obviously has an in-house research arm, you're sort of unique because you have that in-house research arm, and then you also have this layer of funding administration. So in addition to providing SBIR funds in specific categories that is within NETL's purview, you also offer this whole group of this expertise, if you will, in those different technology areas that you mentioned. And so, you know, doing something like collaboratively going after other funding, you know, where you take NETL's expertise paired with maybe university expertise or startup expertise, and you go after even more funding together, is also an option on the table, right?
That is correct. And yes, and as Dave and I have been working together, we work with a number of research universities in both the Albany area, I know, including Oregon State University. I know I've been working in the Pittsburgh area with University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon and others. But long story short is that we try to connect folks with either, where it's appropriate, our in-house research staff, or our program and project management staff who issues our funding opportunities, and we can, when appropriate, partner with interested organizations who want to apply for external funds outside of the outside of NETL and fossil energy and carbon management, whether that's with the Office of Science or ARPA-E. So other parts of the department, we do apply for those funds in collaboration with some of our partners. So yes, and thanks for bringing that up.
Yep, cool. Okay, so with that, thank you so much, James and Leanne. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Trisha and or Cassidy to talk about the next steps in our session.
Thank you so much, Cassidy. I mean, sorry, Katie. That was a lot to pack into the 1 hour, and we are at time. So as you saw probably in the chat there, we did save some time after this session for networking and breakouts. So we'll have Leon available, James and Dave and other colleagues from NETL, and then hopefully Katie, Jen, and Beth can stay on as well to chat. So please join us for more events tomorrow. You can find all the details in the agenda on the event app. And thank you everybody for joining and listening in. I hope you feel inspired and encouraged, and feel free to reach out to everybody. Their information should be again in the event app. So with that, thank you.